Mexico, 1994, 1995. A change of administrations. Every 6 years they get a new president. Every 6 years they have a devaluation of their currency and reset and sometimes have to nationalize the banking system. In 1994, they had been issuing a lot of securities denominated in US dollars with a real interest rate guaranteed by the government to the foreign holders of these bonds, called tesobonos. And it was all going along just fine for a while, as long as they had high internal real growth in Mexico relative to the real interest rate in those bonds. And then kapoom, it was over. And the whole scheme collapsed. And after nationalizing the banks, then denationalizing the banks, privatizing them back into the hands mostly of foreign owners. Now there are no Mexican banks as such left after it. Getting some monetary stability, and the peso is more or less trading in a narrow range against the dollar. One might look at it and say, well, the crisis is over. It was a financial crisis, it was a banking crisis, a monetary crisis. It finally came to an end, and they've been going along fairly well for about 10 years now. And that would be false, because the real damage of that was not to the issue of money or banks per se, but it was to contracts and the rule of law and property. Because what happened in the 94-95 episode is the courts in Mexico, most law in Mexico is in the state courts, 30 states, refused to enforce loans backed by real property. After that, you could not make, and still cannot today, 15 years later, make a collateralized loan. A bank has no recourse to the courts to evict a tenant or to repossess property. So there is no lending for mortgages, for businesses, for farms, for other purposes that requires collateral. And you can imagine what that is doing to economic development and progress in Mexico. Everything gravitates to the state as a result. The only way you can have new houses built is the government builds them, because the government can make a loan to a homeowner, because if the homeowner does not perform in the loan to the government, well, the government's got guns. And they don't need the courts to repossess the property. They have a different way to do it. The reason I find that especially troubling as a historical development is over the last couple of years what we have seen is in various parts of the United States, the local sheriff's department refuses to issue an eviction notice or to carry it out, even if the judge writes it. The current Attorney General of Connecticut, running for the United States, he's an attorney general, law enforcement officer, wants a moratorium on home mortgage foreclosures for at least a couple of years. The banks would not be allowed to collect repossessed property or foreclose on them. So it's an erosion of property rights, erosion of contracts, and a market economy is a contract economy. It is a property economy. And if we allow those things to be eroded because of what is basically a financial crisis, we're in real deep soup. But just a couple of years later, we had the Asia debt crisis. What were the root components of the Asia debt crisis? It was the governments throughout the region were guaranteeing loans and investments, mostly of foreigners coming. Somebody borrowed 1% in Japan and lend it in Thailand or Taiwan for 15%. And you don't need an MBA to figure out how to make money on that, guaranteed by the taxpayers of these countries. And they were making guarantees that they could not fulfill. Absolutely, arithmetically, could not fulfill the promises they were making. And China had some of the problem with their JETICs. But very short term after that, did we learn our lesson? No. We had long-term capital management that was making promises that it could fulfill. That could not fulfill. That was not a government, but still they were making promises that could not be fulfilled. Russia, in their debt situation, had made a lot of promises they couldn't fulfill. And where are we now? State and local governments, pension funds of school teachers, firemen, policemen, all of the employees of many of the states in the United States, the U.S. federal government, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and then, of course, Greece, Spain, Portugal, Ireland, Italy, making promises that they cannot fulfill in real goods terms. The promise is in nominal claims terms. So we have what James Buchanan recently called monetary anarchy, that you can issue a claim on future consumption denominated in a nominal currency that cannot be fulfilled in real consumption terms. So we've followed up the end of the Cold War, when the Berlin Wall came down, with the era of promise breakers. And the promise breakers are governments in many of the Western democracies and some of the Asian democracies and others that have issued promises to their own people that simply cannot be fulfilled. And what follows it all, I don't know. We'll talk about it. Thank you.